Supercell made over 50 balance changes in the last update, and that has resulted in 160 changes to this tier list. Hello fellow brawlers, I'm KairosTime, and it is time to brawl, and it is also time for version 22 of the pro competitive tier list. And we've made some huge improvements since the last one. I've recruited over 20 of the best players in the world to vote on which tier every brawler should be in for every single mode. We literally have winners from the Brawl Stars World Championship for the past 2 years, players over 40,000 trophies, world record holders for power play, and several other very well-respected players in the competitive community. Every player on this list is absolutely fantastic at Brawl Stars and know what they're talking about. Now, if any of the votes were actually close to a tie, I had Brawl Stats pull data exclusively from regional top 200 players and use those stats to break the ties. Never before has so much effort been put into creating the most accurate tier list in the history of Brawl Stars for the competitive pro scene. Now, there are links to brawlstats.com and to the Twitters of all the competitive players in the description of this video, so make sure you guys give them a follow. We're gonna start off this video by revealing where Byron and Edgar, the two newest brawlers, are being placed for each mode, and then we'll talk about brawlers that are either moving up or down in more than half of the modes in Brawl Stars. After that, I'm going to reveal the game mode tier lists, and make sure you guys stick around to the end where we are going to be going over the 3v3 overall tier list. It's time to brawl like never before, so without further ado, I give you tier list 22. KAIROS, code Kairos in the Brawl Stars shop because Kairos made a rhyme. Starting off, we have our venomous snake oil salesman, Byron. Byron is a jack of all trades. He snipes like Piper, he throws like Barley, he poisons like Crow, and he heals like Poco. Byron can provide constant support to his teammates while staying safely away from danger, and he is the strongest support brawler in the entire game. And as you guys can see, he's in the S tier for almost every single game mode. Now, Byron's what I like to call a hotshot brawler. He's basically so good that he pretty much shapes which brawlers are good and bad in the competitive scene just because he's played so much and he is so competitive. In other words, brawlers that counter him tend to be more competitive, and brawlers that struggle against him are in a little bit of a tough spot for this tier list. Up next, we have Edgar. Here's my scarf. Parkour! This El Primo Daryl hybrid of a brawler is an assassin like no other. Believe me when I say that his gadget is straight up broken. Unlike other melee brawlers who have to really struggle to get their super charged up, Edgar's able to close the gap between enemies very quickly by just popping that gadget right at the beginning of a match. And even without his gadget, his super charges automatically, and this gives him a huge advantage. Edgar is in the S tier and A tier for most of the game modes in Brawl Stars. Now we're going to talk about the brawlers who are worse in over half of the game modes, and then we'll talk about the brawlers who are better in over half the game modes. The last tier list's king of Brawl Stars has fallen, and he has fallen in literally every single mode in the game. After a huge nerf to his attack range, along with a harmful bug fix to his flying hook gadget, it seems like Carl's able to finally stop digging because Brawl Stars pretty much dug a grave for him. Next, we have Brock, and if Carl was the king of the last tier list, then Brock was the prince. He too has been dethroned after all 4 nerfs to the face, making him worse in every single game mode. Now, Gene only got 2 heavy nerfs and a rework to his gadget, but it's now time for Gene to hide inside his lamp because he's going down in the 6 modes that he was not already in the F tier for. Now, in all honesty, Penny's well-rounded nature was likely a little bit overrated in the last tier list, so this time she's moving down in ranking despite being the only brawler who did not receive a single balance change in 2020. Now, you would think that Barley would do pretty well in this meta because it kind of favors control type brawlers like Barley, but the presence of Colt's gadget and Edgar have him in a really rough spot because they both counter him so well. With the new hotshot Byron in town, Amber is losing steam. Unfortunately for Amber, a long-range control meta means that there are fewer tanks for her to counter, which is why she's going down in so many modes. And similar to Amber, Max is taking a hit with the new meta as well, and while she's actually going up in hot zone, she's going down in 4 other game modes since the last tier list. Now, despite a health buff, less frequent melee brawlers means that Gale is nearing retirement. When push comes to shove, there's very little use to him using his super against ranged enemies because they're already so far away. Now let's talk about the brawlers who went up in rank in over half of the game modes, and then we're going to jump into the gem grab tier list. Our second favorite game just got another upgrade. 50% damage bonus from his super was just the buff that he needed to really solidify his position in a competitive meta, especially as a ranged damage brawler. And of course, when range is in the game, Piper definitely thrives because she's well equipped equipped at dealing with both Byron and Colt. And with B's new Rattled Hive gadget, you better believe that B is getting some sweet honey love. Now, as such, he's actually going up in practically every single mode. Now, along with Byron, who is a hotshot, Colt is absolutely a hotshot in this meta. Colt is straight up defining the landscape of Brawl Stars quite literally with his new Silver Bullet gadget. He's able to immediately destroy any obstacle on the field and clear any walls, which makes it very nice and open, which is exactly how Colt likes it. If that wasn't enough, buffs to his attack damage and his Slick Boots star power really solidify his spot in the meta. Now let's go over the gem grab tier list, and then we'll cover the Brawl Ball tier list. Here are the B tier brawlers for gem grab. Going up and joining the party in the B tier, we have Tick and BB. On the flip side, Brock, Carl, Penny, and Rosa have all downgraded from higher tiers into the B tier. Now we also have Amber, Crow, and Gale, who are no longer competitive options and who are moving into the F tier. Next, we have the A tier brawlers. B, Nita, Piper, Poco, and Mortis are headed up into the A tier, and Jean, Lou, Spike, and Tara have fallen down into the A tier. Here are the S tier brawlers, and we're adding the newcomer Edgar right into the S tier. And acting as his ranged competition, 8-Bit, Colt, and Mr. P all follow his lead. And then of course we have Byron, who is taking over Carl's old spot as the golden S tier brawler for gem grab, the best for the mode. Now specifically, Byron really shines as a gem carrier, where he supports his teammates on both the left and on the right while he collects gems. And sometimes he just falls back whenever the enemy team tries to, push them back a little bit, and he can just support his teammates with heals without even getting anywhere close to enemy range. Next is the Brawl Ball tier list, and then we'll talk about Heist. Now going up from the non-competitive tier up into the B tier, we have Piper and Tick. Now a little bit less viable than before, we have Brock, Carl, Daryl, Frank, Jean, Lou, and Rosa, who are falling down into the B tier. And making room for them are El Primo, Gale, and Penny, who are all headed down into the non-competitive F tier. Now going up into the A tier are 8-Bit, Mortis, and Surge, and going down into the A tier, we have Jackie, Max, Sandy, and Tara. Now we have the S tier brawlers, and just like before, the newest additions, Edgar and Byron, find themselves perfectly fit for the S tier. Joining them is B with her super strong gadget, and finally replacing Carl as our golden S tier brawler is the new and improved Slick Boots Colt. He's faster, he can break walls, and he deals more damage, and it's obvious to see why he is the best for Brawl Ball. Up next is Heist, and then we have Bounty. First up are the B tier brawlers, and to start we have B and Piper, who are moving up from the F tier, and we also have Barley, BB, and Carl, who are less than happy to find out that they moved all the way down into the B tier, but not as unhappy as El Primo, Frank, and Rosa, who have been dumped into the F tier. When it comes to the A tier, we have Edgar and Byron, who are good, but don't deal enough damage to really be considered S tier brawlers, and joining them is Pam from the B tier, and Brock, Max, and Spike are falling down into the A tier. Then of course we have Colt, who is replacing Brock as the best brawler for Heist, and it's clear to see why. Colt's ranged DPS is one of the best in the game, and he's practically dominating Brawl Stars as a whole right now, and I don't even think I need to explain why he's so good in Heist. Next, we're going to talk about the changes in Bounty, and then we'll talk about Siege. Right off the bat, we are adding Edgar into the B tier. Heading on up with him are the tanky 8-Bit and Daryl from the F tier previously, and then we have Carl, Jean, Jackie, and Penny, who are falling down into the B tier. And unfortunately for Leon, he is going down into the F tier for Bounty. Here are the A tier brawlers. B and Colt are getting upgrades into the A tier. Brock and Sprout are heading down into the A tier, and for the S tier, we have Byron, who is stealing yet another #1 spot and replacing Brock as the best brawler for Bounty. This should honestly be no surprise, since Byron deals deceptively high amounts of damage from a distance, and he can keep his teammates alive while staying out of range from enemies. Next is Siege, and then we're going to talk about Hot Zone. Starting off, we have Mortis, Nita, and Piper, who are getting upgraded into the B tier, and then there's also Amber, BB, Brock, Daryl, Frank, Gale, Jean, and Penny, who are all getting demoted down into the B tier. And at least for now, El Primo and Nani are retiring from this mode altogether. And we have a lot of brawlers in the A tier for Siege. Both Byron and Edgar find themselves here as a pretty solid option, and moving up into the A tier are 8-Bit, B, and Sandy. Now, Barley, Carl, and Max are also being added as well, but they're falling from their previous S tier positions in the last tier list. And there's only 2 brawlers in Siege, and seizing that #1 golden S tier position is none other than Colt, who's replacing Barley as the best brawler for the mode. Being able to move quickly, break walls, and deal a ton of damage is pretty much what it takes to be good in Siege, and that's exactly why Colt is voted as the best by the pros. Now it's time for our final 3v3 mode, Hot Zone, and then we're going to talk about Showdown before I reveal the overall tier list for the 3v3 competitive modes. Starting off, we have Max and Sprout, who are going up from the F tier into the B tier, and then they're also also joined by Amber, Barley, Carl, Ems, Gale, and Spike, who are moving down into the B tier. El Primo and Terra are leaving the B tier altogether and are headed into the F tier. Next, we have the A tier brawlers, and Edgar might be a little bit angry to know that he's not quite S tier, but A tier is pretty great. Then we also have 8-Bit, B, Jackie, Lou, and Mr. P, who are going up into the A tier. And being demoted from the S tier, we have Colette, Frank, Poco, and Rosa. We have a completely new set of S tier brawlers for Hot Zone like Colt and Pam, who can deal a lot of damage, break walls, and do a really good job at controlling the zone. Then we have Byron being added into the golden S tier position, replacing Colette as the best brawler for the mode. Now, typically Byron exceeds in modes where his healing capabilities can really shine, and in Hot Zone, he can easily help allies win their 1v1s from afar so that central control of the zone can really be established and maintained. Now, before we cover the overall 3v3 tier list, let's go ahead and talk about solo showdown and duo showdown. By the way, I wanted to give a huge thank you to Ash Brawl Stars, who really helped me solidify these positions for solo and duo showdown. Make sure you guys check him out on both YouTube and Twitter, because when it comes to Brawl Stars, he really knows what he's talking about. Now, to begin, we have Byron being added into the B tier, and joining him from the F tier are Gale, Nani, and Nita. Moving down into the B tier are Brock, Carl, Colette, Jean, and Spike, and then Amber, Barley, and Mr. P are now finding themselves in the F tier. Now, moving up into the A tier, we have Bull, Leon, and Shelly, specifically because they're actually really solid counters against the #1 brawler for solo showdown. Not talking about Colt, although Colt is going up into the S tier for solo showdown, but Edgar is replacing Carl as the golden S tier brawler, the best brawler for solo showdown. He is straight up ridiculous in solo showdown because of how quickly he can charge up his super with his gadget at the very beginning. He can ramp up in power cubes super easily. He's just a monster, and being able to counter him is going to be really important if you want to do really good in solo showdown high in trophies. Next is duo showdown, and then we'll have the overall tier list. First up are the B tier brawlers. We have Dynamite, Mortis, Nita, Poco, and Shelly, who are moving up into the B tier, and Amber, who's dropped down into the B tier. We also have moved a ton of brawlers into the F tier, including Barley, Bo, Brock, Carl, Penny, Sandy, Sprout, and Tick. Now, going up into the A tier are Jackie, Piper, Surge, and Terra, and Jean and Max are headed down into the A tier. Now, Edgar finds himself being added into a solid position in the S tier, and then we also have Colt and B, who are also being upgraded into the S tier. Finally, we have Byron, with his supportive abilities, is replacing Jean, the king of duo showdown, and for good reason. And with that, it is now time for us to talk about the overall 3v3 tier list. Now, as a reminder, brawlers get points based off of what tier placement they get in all 6 of the 3v3 modes. I removed points from solo and duo showdown tier lists since they are no longer part of power play and are not considered to be competitive by the pro community. Now, for this tier list, I've adjusted how much each tier is worth. B tier placements are still worth 1 point, okay? A tier placements are now worth 3 points instead of 2, and S tier placements are worth 9 points instead of 3. This way, a highly competitive S tier brawler for 1 game mode will score higher than a mediocre brawler who's really only okay, but happens to be B tier in several of the game modes. Now, at the very bottom of the tier list are Crow, El Primo, Leon, and Shelly, who did not even get put into the B tier for any of the 3v3 modes. Now, interestingly enough, Shelly has actually been in dead last for the tier list for the past 15 months. Now, you'll also notice that Jean, Rosa, Frank, and Gale dropped down significantly since the last tier list and are now in the B tier. Now, in the A tier, you'll notice both Brock and Carl, who were previously at the top of the last tier list, and then you'll also notice Mortis, who's gone up into the A tier with his increased viability in 3 modes. And at the very top of the S tier is Colt, who is ranked as S tier for 5 of the 6 3v3 modes. And following him is Byron, who is S tier for 4 of the 3v3 modes. Next, we have 8-Bit, who got a huge buff to his super and really made him a lot more viable, and Edgar, who is viable in, well, every game mode. B also went up in quite a few modes since her gadget was neglected in the previous tier list, and despite both Max and Spike decreasing their tier in 3 game modes, they are still barely within the S tier. And there you have it, folks, the new and improved tier list version 22. I want to know what you guys thought about this tier list, and how do you feel about the meta right now? How many more tier lists are going to be required before Shelly gets a buff? How long is Colt going to go before he gets nerfed? I'd love to know what you guys think, so please leave a comment in the section below. And while you are at it, make sure you check out the socials of our pro player collaborators. We really could not have done this tier list without them. And also, I want to give a huge thank you to Brawl Stats for providing the stats that were needed to settle any disputes between the pros. Subscribe for more videos like this one, and don't forget to use code Kairos in the Brawl Stars shop. And for now, guys, this is KairosTime ticking by, and we will see you in Brawl Stars.